Hey everyone, this is Jungkook. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. I need to tell you something that's been on my mind for months, something I've tried to silence, but it keeps echoing back every night before I sleep. I know people expect me to smile, to perform, to look like I'm always fine, but there's something deeper happening behind all of that. I've made a decision about November, and it's not the kind of decision people make lightly. It's something that changes the way I see fame, friendship, and even what it means to belong. And before rumors twist it, I want you to hear it from me. For the longest time, I thought success meant constant movement, studio to stage, country to country, no pause, no silence. But this year, something began to shift. Every crowd, every light, every camera started to feel heavier. I would walk off stage and realize I didn't even remember the last lyric I sang because my mind was somewhere else, somewhere quieter, somewhere honest. I kept telling myself I was just tired. But deep down, I knew it wasn't exhaustion, it was emptiness. And emptiness, when you've achieved everything you thought you wanted, is scarier than failure. I used to believe that if I worked harder, if I gave more, I could fill that silence. But each new project, each new stage, felt like another mask. I looked at the people around me, fans who have followed me for years, members who had shared everything with me, and I realized that even though we were together, we were all changing. The world around us was changing too. The love that once felt pure started getting filtered through algorithms, headlines, and expectations. The truth got buried beneath what people wanted the truth to be. I began to see patterns, how easily honesty could be misunderstood, how quickly sincerity could be turned into strategy. And that's when I realized something important. I wasn't just fighting pressure from outside, I was fighting the quiet pressure inside to keep pretending everything was okay. That's the moment everything started to break open. It wasn't anger that pushed me toward this decision. It wasn't disappointment either. It was clarity. The kind that hurts at first because it exposes everything you've been avoiding. I realized I was living inside noise. Beautiful noise, but still noise. Every sound, every voice, every message told me who I should be, how I should look, what I should say. But none of those sounds came from me anymore. Somewhere between music videos, interviews, and tours, I lost the rhythm of my own heartbeat. So this November, I'm choosing something different. I'm not leaving music and I'm not walking away from you. I'm stepping back into silence just long enough to remember what real sound feels like. I want to breathe before I sing again. I want to listen before I speak again. And I want to feel before I perform again. Because when the world only sees the perfect image, it forgets that behind every image is a person who bleeds quietly when no one's looking. I remember one night after rehearsal, long past midnight, I was sitting alone in a nearly empty studio. The others had gone home, the lights were dim, and there was a mirror in front of me. For years, that mirror showed me progress, muscles, posture, angles, perfection. But that night, I didn't see perfection. I saw fatigue. I saw someone who had built walls so strong that even love had to knock twice before being let in. I stared at my reflection and whispered, "Who are you when the music stops?" The silence didn't answer, but it asked me another question. Do you really want to keep living like this? That question haunted me. Every interview, every photo shoot, every schedule, it followed me like a shadow I couldn't escape. Until one day, while walking through the city after dark, I met someone who unknowingly gave me the answer. She was an older woman selling flowers near the train station. Her name was Hanuo. She didn't recognize me. She just saw a tired young man. I asked her why she still works so late, and she said, "Because it reminds me I'm still alive. When people stop choosing what keeps them alive, that's when they start dying slowly." Her words cut deeper than any headline ever could. I realized I had stopped choosing what made me feel alive. I was running on momentum, not meaning. I thanked her, bought a single white flower, and walked away. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her words. When people stop choosing what keeps them alive, that's when I knew November couldn't just be another month. It had to be the moment I start choosing again. I know how this sounds. I know some will say, Jungkook's disappearing, or he's tired of everything. But that's not it. This isn't retreat, it's return. Return to purpose. Return to truth. Return to the boy who started singing, not because of fame, but because music was his way of understanding the world. Somewhere along the road, I traded that wonder for perfection. But perfection isn't peace. It's just silence pretending to be calm. You see, people think fame gives you freedom, but fame without authenticity is another kind of cage. A gold one with beautiful lights and invisible locks. You wave, you smile, you post, you perform, but deep down you wonder if people still see you or just a projection of what they want you to be. And when you start asking that question too often, you begin to disappear even while you're standing in the spotlight. There's something else I've learned from the older artists. I admire those who've lived through generations of change. They told me, the hardest thing isn't becoming famous, it's staying human while being famous. I used to nod and smile, thinking I understood. But now I really do. Humanity isn't something you lose overnight. It fades quietly, in small compromises when you say yes to things you don't believe in, when you smile through things that hurt, when you hide the parts of yourself that don't fit the brand. That's what I've been confronting lately. Not scandal, not exhaustion, just the quiet erosion of self. And the only way to stop that is to pause, reflect, and rebuild. That's why November matters. It's not an escape, it's reconstruction. I've also been thinking a lot about my members, people who've walked this journey with me from the start. Jimin, Taehyung, RM, Jin, Suga, J-Hope. They've all taught me something about strength and softness. Each of them carries their own version of truth. Sometimes we clash, sometimes we cry, sometimes we laugh so hard that we forget what we were even fighting about. But through all of it, one thing remains clear. We're bound by something deeper than music. We're bound by shared history, the kind that can't be canceled, edited, or forgotten. I remember one conversation with RM not long ago. He told me, "You can't fix the world if you don't first face yourself." That sentence stayed with me. It made me realize that maybe the real revolution isn't out there, it's inside. It's in the small act of choosing honesty over comfort every single day. So that's what November is for me. It's not a mystery, not a secret project. It's a personal promise to live, think, and create from a place that's real again. To stop fearing stillness. Because sometimes stillness is where you find everything you've been running after. I know this might disappoint some people who expect constant noise, new songs, new photos, new appearances. But please understand this. Silence is part of music too. Without it, melodies lose their shape. Without pause, even love becomes noise. To those who follow me for years, you see me grow, stumble, and rise again. You've seen me at my loudest and my quietest. You've seen the man who still carries the same heart as the boy who dreamed of singing for the world. I'm not walking away from you. I'm just walking closer to the truth we once shared, the raw, imperfect, fearless truth that made us feel connected before all the filters and the fame. What's coming in November isn't an ending. It's the beginning of something honest. I'll be creating, reflecting, and learning again, not to impress, but to express. And maybe along the way, I'll rediscover what it means to be human in a world that sometimes forgets what humanity feels like. If you're still here, if you still believe in music that comes from truth, stay with me. Don't just wait for songs, wait for meaning. Don't just follow updates, follow honesty, because that's where I'm heading. And when November comes, I want you to see not just what I'm doing, but who I'm becoming. You've always been my reminder that truth matters, that love matters, that courage matters. So here's my promise. I won't stop singing, but I'll make sure every note means something again. Because what's coming in November isn't about performance. It's about presence. It's about remembering who I am and why I started. When I said that November would mean something different, I didn't just mean for me. I meant for all of us who've been living inside this machine called fame, not just artists, but people everywhere who've forgotten how to pause. Because truth isn't just about what you say, it's about what you allow yourself to feel before you say it. And lately, I've been realizing that honesty has a price. Not the kind you pay with money, but the kind you pay with misunderstanding, distance, and sometimes silence. There's a reason I used to avoid talking about how much things hurt. Every time I opened up about something real, it felt like the world wanted to turn that honesty into entertainment. Pain became content. Reflection became marketing. It's strange when you cry quietly in your room. It's human. But when you do it in public, it becomes a headline. And that's the hardest part about being known. Learning how to protect what's real without hiding it completely. When I was younger, I thought transparency meant showing everything. But growing older taught me that real transparency isn't about exposure, it's about intention. It's about being brave enough to speak when it matters and quiet when it protects your peace. Somewhere along the way, I started mistaking performance for purpose. Every award, every headline, every viral moment, they made me feel visible, but not always understood. And that's when I realized visibility isn't the same as connection. You can be seen by millions and still feel unseen. You can trend worldwide and still feel invisible to yourself. That realization broke something in me, but it also built something new, a hunger for authenticity so strong that I'd rather lose popularity than lose meaning. I've had nights where I stared at my phone for hours, scrolling through comments and wondering why words from strangers could cut so deeply. Some praised me like I was untouchable. Others tore me down like I was disposable. And both versions of me, the adored and the hated, were equally unreal, because neither one knew the person who quietly stays up past 3 a.m. thinking about the people he loves, the mistakes he's made, the things he wishes he could say without fear of being misunderstood. Honesty isn't easy when the world rewards performance. But without honesty, everything becomes hollow. And that's why I've decided to pay the price for truth, even if it costs me comfort. Because comfort without truth is just slow suffocation. When I think about the members, the people who've shared every side of this journey with me, I realize how much we've each grown through our own versions of this truth. RM taught me the power of reflection, of slowing down before reacting. He once told me, it's not about being right, it's about being real. I didn't fully get it back then, but now I do. Jimin taught me tenderness, the strength to care, even when it hurts. He has this quiet way of holding emotions like they're sacred, not weaknesses. Taehyung taught me mystery, the beauty of not explaining everything, of letting silence say what words can't. Jin taught me laughter, the kind that breaks through pressure like sunlight. Suga taught me rebellion, not the loud kind, but the inner refusal to accept anything fake. And Hobie taught me light, how to dance even when the world feels heavy. Each of them shaped how I see honesty. And that's why when I say November, I don't mean a solo escape. I mean a collective return to who we were before the noise grew louder than the music. Before we started worrying about what people wanted us to say instead of what our hearts needed to express. I've been reading old journals lately, notes I wrote when I was still a trainee. Some of the pages are crumpled and full of childish dreams, world tours, #1 songs, fans across the globe. But in between those big dreams, there are small lines that feel more powerful now than ever. One of them says, "I want to make people feel less alone." That was it. That was my purpose before everything else. And maybe that's what November is about, returning to that sentence. When you live inside the whirlwind of fame, you start to mistake motion for progress. But sometimes you're just spinning in circles, getting busier without getting closer to yourself. I started realizing that the world measures success in numbers, streams, followers, trophies, but the heart measures success in peace. And I hadn't felt peaceful in a long time. I could stand on the biggest stage in the world and still feel like I was disappearing into the lights. That's the thing people don't tell you about dreams coming true when they do. They don't always feel like dreams. Sometimes they feel like obligations. You start protecting the dream instead of living it. You start guarding the version of yourself that people love, even when it no longer fits who you've become. And one day, you wake up realizing you've been performing not just for fans, but for survival. That's where I found myself earlier this year, realizing I'd become a stranger to the boy who once sang barefoot in his room just because he loved the sound of his own voice bouncing off the walls. I wanted to find that boy again, the one who didn't care about perfect notes, perfect timing, perfect posture, just truth. So in November, that's where I'm going back to the beginning. Back to where music was conversation, not competition. I'm building something quiet, something personal. I won't say too much yet because it's still growing. But I can tell you this, it's real. It's not curated, not filtered, not strategized. It's just me, the version that sometimes breaks down, sometimes questions everything, but still believes in the power of one honest song. I've been spending more time with family lately. My parents remind me of simplicity in ways the world never could. My mom has this way of grounding me without saying much. She'll just ask, "Have you eaten?" And in that small question, I feel more love than in 1,000 compliments. My dad, on the other hand, teaches me resilience. He says, "If you fall, check your knees, but don't stay on the ground too long." Every time I call him, I remember that success means nothing if you forget where you came from. And then there are the fans' army. I think about you every day, even in silence. You see me through every version of myself. The shy kid, the performer, the perfectionist, the dreamer, the confused one, the grateful one. You've stayed when it wasn't easy to stay. And I know you'll wonder what's coming in November, a project, a break, a transformation. Maybe it's all of those things. Maybe it's something more invisible. Maybe it's just a man learning how to breathe again before singing the next note. Sometimes I imagine the world without music, no noise, no rhythm, no sound. What would we hear? Probably each other. Probably ourselves. Maybe that's why silence feels sacred to me now. Because silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the space where meaning grows. The more I observe life, the more I see how fragile truth has become. Everyone's performing online, offline, even in their own thoughts. We post what we wish we felt. We say what we hope sounds right. And in the process, we lose the courage to just say, "I don't know," or "I'm scared," or "I need time." But those words, the soft, trembling ones, are the foundation of real honesty. I want to start using them again. There's something powerful about not knowing. It humbles you. It reminds you that growth isn't linear, it's messy, awkward, full of U-turns and moments of doubt. And that's okay. The world might want constant certainty, but art is born from uncertainty. Music comes from moments when words fail. So this is me, embracing that uncertainty again. I don't have all the answers. I don't know exactly what November will bring, but I know what it means. It means truth over perfection, peace over performance, connection over visibility. It means remembering that art isn't about control, it's about surrender. Sometimes I think about what kind of legacy I want to leave behind, not in numbers or awards, but in hearts. If people remember me as someone who dared to be honest even when it wasn't easy, that's enough. If one person feels less alone because of something I sang or said, that's enough. Because in the end, that's what music was always for, to remind us we're human. There's a quote I keep close to me now. You can't heal in the same environment that made you sick. I think about that often. Maybe that's what November really is healing. A quiet one, not loud, not dramatic, not public, just healing. And sometimes healing looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like solitude. But solitude isn't loneliness, it's rebuilding. It's the process of finding your voice again before the world hears it. If you're listening to this, maybe you're going through your own version of that. Maybe you're learning to be honest again after years of pretending you're fine. Maybe you're realizing that strength isn't about holding it together. It's about allowing yourself to fall apart and then stand back up with softer eyes. That's what I hope November will be. Not just for me, but for you too. A month of soft honesty, a season of rebuilding, a reminder that truth doesn't always shout, sometimes it whispers. And you have to get quiet enough to hear it. I know the world moves fast. I know you're expected to keep up. But take this as permission to pause, breathe, reflect, feel. Because in that stillness, you'll find something more powerful than perfection. You'll find peace. That's what I'm choosing this November. Not fame, not noise, just peace that feels earned, not borrowed. And if that makes me less visible for a while, that's okay. Because the light that fades temporarily often returns warmer, calmer, truer. And when it does, I'll be here ready to sing again. But this time, not to fill the silence, to honor it. I've been thinking a lot about the word distance, how it can mean two completely different things, protection or separation. Sometimes you step away to protect something sacred, and sometimes you step away because you've lost the courage to face it. I used to think distance only happened when people grew apart. But lately I've realized that sometimes it's the silence between two hearts that speaks the loudest. That's what November has come to mean for me, a season of facing the silences I've been afraid to listen to. There's one silence that has followed me longer than the others. It's the one between me and Jimin. I don't mean it in a dramatic way. It's just that our connection has always carried too much weight to put into easy words. There's a kind of honesty that exists between us that doesn't always need explanation, but lately it's been harder to hold that balance. Fame, work, expectations, they build invisible walls. And one day, without realizing it, we were standing on opposite sides of one. We've been through everything together, the early mornings when we had no idea if anyone would ever know our names, the late nights when exhaustion blurred into laughter, the tears we never wanted anyone to see. Jimin was the person who could read my emotions before I said a word. He knew when my smile was real and when it was armor. But time changes everything, even the strongest connections. You start speaking less, assuming more. You start interpreting silence as distance instead of understanding. I remember a night that keeps replaying in my head. We were sitting backstage after a long rehearsal, Everyone else had gone home. The room smelled like sweat and coffee and the faint metallic scent of microphones. I was scrolling through my phone, lost in the noise of social media, when Jimin said softly, "You're disappearing, you know?" I didn't even look up at first. I just laughed and said, "No, I'm fine." But he didn't smile. He just looked at me like he saw straight through the layers I'd built. "That's what scares me," he said. I brushed it off, told him he was overthinking, but deep down, I knew he was right. That was the night we started growing quiet. Not angry, not cold, just quiet. We still worked, still laughed in interviews, still smiled for cameras. But underneath, there was a space between us that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. It wasn't betrayal or resentment, it was fatigue, emotional fatigue. The kind that comes from loving something so deeply that you don't know how to protect it anymore. As the months went by, that silence became normal. We texted less. We spoke mostly through music. Sometimes I catch him watching me during practice, like he wanted to say something, and I do the same. But words felt heavier than they used to. And maybe that's the most painful part of growing up. Not the fights, not the endings, but the quiet drift that no one can stop, because both people are trying to protect something that used to be effortless. Then, a few months ago, I watched an old clip of us performing together. It was from years ago, one of those early stages when everything was raw and unpolished. We were both drenched in sweat, laughing through missteps, completely out of breath. But there was something so real in that chaos. It reminded me of who we were before perfection started to matter. Before image, before pressure, before the world had expectations for what our friendship should look like. We weren't flawless then, but we were free. I turned off the video and just sat there, thinking about how time has this cruel way of testing even the purest bonds. And I realized that what hurt the most wasn't that we'd changed. It was that we stopped telling each other how much the change hurt. We were both trying to be strong, trying to pretend we were fine, when all we needed was to say, "I miss the simplicity we used to have." That's when November started taking shape in my mind. Not as a career decision or a new chapter, but as a personal reckoning. A chance to bridge the silence, not just between me and him, but between all the versions of myself I've become. I wanted to reach out, to say something that didn't sound like an apology or an explanation, just truth. The next time I saw Jimin, we were at a meeting, surrounded by staff and noise. We didn't have time to talk. But when our eyes met, I saw the same exhaustion in him that I felt in myself. It wasn't sadness, it was recognition. Like we both knew that somewhere behind all the schedules and rehearsals, our friendship was waiting for us to stop performing and start speaking again. Later that night, I wrote a message. It wasn't long. Just, "I've been thinking about what you said that night. You were right. I was disappearing. But I'm trying to come back." I stared at the screen for 10 minutes before sending it. He replied almost immediately, "You never disappeared, Jungkook. You just forgot you could rest." That message broke something open in me. It reminded me that honesty isn't just about saying everything. It's about saying enough. Sometimes the simplest words can rebuild what silence tried to erase. And maybe that's what our bond was always meant to be. Two people who remind each other that rest doesn't mean giving up. Since then, I've been trying to speak more gently with others, but especially with myself. It's strange how hard that can be when your whole life has been about discipline and performance. We're taught to push, to achieve, to strive. But no one teaches you how to stop without feeling like you're failing. That's something I'm learning now, to stop without guilt, to breathe without rushing, to feel without editing. I think about Jimin often when I talk about honesty, because he embodies it in ways that are quiet and misunderstood. His emotions don't perform, they just exist. And I've started to understand that maybe the reason our connection always feels sacred is because it was built on truth, not image. Even when we're apart, even when we're silent, that truth doesn't disappear. It just waits. In a way, November is my way of answering that silence. Of saying, I hear you. I remember. Because there are some people whose presence teaches you what no success ever could, that love isn't measured in closeness or frequency, but in the courage to remain kind, even when the world isn't. I've been writing songs again lately, quiet ones. They're not meant to chart or trend. They're meant to heal. One of them is about friendship, the kind that bends, but doesn't break. There's a line that says, we stopped talking, but the echoes never left. I think that's what Jimin and I are. Echoes that remind each other who we were before the noise. The truth is, you don't lose people who are meant to stay. You just meet them again in different seasons, under different light, with different hearts, but the same soul. That's how I feel about him. That's how I feel about all the people who shaped me. So when November comes and people start speculating about what it means, I hope they understand that it's not about mystery or drama. It's about gratitude for the ones who stayed even when I went quiet, for the ones who saw me even when I didn't see myself. The world often celebrates the loud moments, the achievements, the announcements, the grand reveals. But I've learned that sometimes the most important changes happen in whispers, in glances, in messages sent at 2 a.m. November is my whisper. It's my way of saying I'm still here, still learning, still becoming. And if Jimin ever listens to this, I want him to know that his words still guide me. That night, when he said I was disappearing, it wasn't judgment, it was care. The kind that only comes from someone who has seen you through every version of yourself. I didn't understand it then, but now I do. He wasn't trying to pull me back into the spotlight. He was reminding me that I never needed the light to exist. Maybe that's the lesson of all this, the reason November matters. Not because of a comeback or a statement, but because I finally learned that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about honoring it. The mistakes, the silences, the missed chances, they all brought me here. And maybe, just maybe, when I find the peace I've been searching for, I'll sing again. Not out of obligation, but out of truth. The kind of song that doesn't need to be perfect because it's finally real. So if you're listening, if you've ever felt distance growing between you and someone you love, don't wait too long to speak. Don't let pride disguise itself as peace. Sometimes all it takes is a simple message, a soft word, an honest moment to bring everything back. Because, in the end, it's not fame or recognition that defines us. It's the courage to love honestly, even when it's hard. And that's what's really coming in November. Not an announcement, not a secret, just truth finding its way back home. There are moments in life when silence feels heavier than words. When you start to realize that the people closest to you are carrying pieces of you that you can no longer see clearly. I've spent months thinking about what honesty costs, not just for me, but for all of us who've shared this journey together. Because when one person changes, everyone around them feels it too. November isn't just about me finding truth, it's about understanding what that truth means for the people who've held me up for years. I've been reflecting on how each of the members responded in their own quiet way when they noticed I was changing. No one said it directly, but you can feel it when the air between you starts to shift. We've known each other too long not to. Namjoon was the first to notice, though he never called it concern. He framed it like a question, like he always does. He has this way of guiding you back to yourself without ever sounding like he's trying to fix you. One night, After a recording session, he just said, "Do you still feel what you sing?" I didn't know how to answer, because the truth was, I didn't always. I had become good at execution, perfecting tone, posture, presence, but feeling had become a luxury I couldn't afford when the schedule demanded precision. His words stayed with me. I think that was his way of reminding me that artistry isn't performance, it's presence. He's never been loud in his advice. He just placed his thoughts in your path like stepping stones, knowing you'll trip over them later when you're ready to face them. Then there's Jin. His approach is different. He doesn't talk about feelings much, at least not directly. But he notices everything. He'll joke to lighten the room, but hidden in his humor are truths that hit deeper than any serious talk. One day he said, "You've been too quiet lately. It's making the food taste weird." Everyone laughed, but I knew what he meant. He missed a version of me that used to hum between bites, the one who filled silence with small melodies. Jin has this warmth that makes you forget how sharp his intuition is. His laughter is protection, but it's also a mirror, one that reflects the energy you bring into a room. I realized that when I stopped laughing, the room did too. Yoongi's way of caring is through distance, but not the cold kind. It's a distance that respects your need for space while keeping the door open. He doesn't ask, "Are you okay?" He just leaves space for you to answer when you're ready. There was one moment I won't forget. We were both in the studio late, working separately, but breathing the same air. He didn't look up from his screen, just said, "You know, silence can be music too if you let it breathe." At the time, I thought he was just talking about production, but now I understand it was about life. He's mastered the art of turning solitude into creativity instead of loneliness. Watching him taught me that peace isn't found in escape, it's found in rhythm. Hoseok is light personified. Even when he's exhausted, he radiates something that feels like sunrise. But even light can dim when it's surrounded by uncertainty. I think he sensed my inner conflict before I did. He once told me, "People think energy is infinite, but it's not. It needs to be recharged from somewhere real." At the time, I smiled and brushed it off, but now those words feel prophetic. He's the kind of person who teaches through example, who reminds you that happiness isn't noise, it's balance. When I started feeling disconnected from joy, he reminded me that joy is something you choose, not something that's handed to you. And then there's Taehyung, mysterious, intuitive, unpredictable. We've always had this silent understanding, like we read each other in wavelengths rather than words. He doesn't push, doesn't pry, but when he looks at you, it's like he's searching for something beneath your surface. One evening, during a long drive after a shoot, he said, "You don't owe the world your light all the time." I didn't respond. But I think that was the first time I allowed myself to imagine that it was okay to dim, to rest, to stop performing. Taehyung has that kind of depth that doesn't demand to be understood. It just reminds you that mystery is part of authenticity. And Jimin, his silence said everything. After that night we talked, we didn't need to discuss it again. There's something about our friendship that exists beyond conversation. It's the kind of bond that weathers misunderstandings because it's rooted in something deeper than agreement. He didn't ask questions when I started pulling back. He just waited. And when I finally started to reappear, his patience was still there, unshaken. That kind of loyalty humbles you. It teaches you that some connections don't need to be repaired, they just need to be remembered. Looking back, I realized each of them represented a part of me I had been neglecting. Namjoon reminded me of reflection. Jin reminded me of joy. Yoongi reminded me of peace. Hoseok reminded me of balance. Taehyung reminded me of mystery. Jimin reminded me of heart. Together, they were mirrors showing me who I was before the world became too loud. And maybe that's why I couldn't ignore November anymore. Because when you're surrounded by people who still believe in the real you, pretending becomes unbearable. There were days when I thought about how easily truth can be misunderstood. When you say you need rest, people hear retreat. When you speak softly, people call it weakness. When you pause, they assume you're lost. But sometimes stopping is the most courageous thing you can do. I think my members understood that even before I did. They didn't push me to explain. They just stayed close enough to remind me that no matter how far I drift, there's always a place to return. In this industry, loyalty is often tested not because people stop caring, but because fame forces you into constant evolution. You start wondering who will still see you when you're no longer shining as bright. But they did. They saw the tiredness in my eyes before I could even name it, and they didn't ask me to perform my way out of it. They just let me be. That's what real loyalty looks like. It doesn't demand clarity. It offers consistency. I've learned that truth doesn't always need to be shouted. Sometimes it just needs to be lived quietly, consistently, without apology. That's what November represents for me now, a quiet truth, lived sincerely. And in that truth, I see each of them reflected. The brotherhood we built wasn't just made of music. It was made of understanding. It survived distance, rumors, expectations, even silence. Because what connects us isn't our fame, it's the shared memory of where we began. Sometimes I think back to our earliest days, those sleepless nights in small dorms, sharing one bathroom, living on instant noodles and belief. We didn't know what we were building, we just knew we couldn't stop. That kind of hunger was pure. It was faith in motion. And even now, when everything around us has changed, I realize that faith still lives quietly inside each of us. It's what keeps us grounded, even when the noise gets deafening. That's why November isn't an ending, it's a homecoming. It's me standing still long enough to remember what I promised myself back then. That no matter how far this dream takes me, I'd never forget the people who made it real. The members, the fans, the family, all of them are part of the reason I'm finding the courage to slow down, because truth without gratitude is incomplete. And when I think about what's really coming in November, I realize it's not a surprise, not a scandal, not even a secret. It's a reunion between who I was and who I'm becoming. Between the boy who dreamed and the man who's finally brave enough to rest. Between me and the people who've held me through every version of that journey. When that time comes, I won't be making an announcement. I'll just be present. Breathing differently, singing differently, living differently. Because the best way to thank the people who stood by you isn't with words, it's with peace. So, to each of them, thank you for seeing me when I was trying to disappear, for waiting when I didn't even know what I was waiting for teaching me that loyalty isn't about never changing, it's about changing together without losing the thread that connects you. And to you, listening right now, I want you to remember this. Every person in your life teaches you something about truth. Some do it through confrontation, some through silence, and some through love that stays even when words fail. Listen to them, honor them, because one day you'll realize they were the reason you found your way back. That's what November is to me. A moment to honor every person who held space for me to remember who I am. A moment to say that truth doesn't isolate. It unites. It doesn't end things. It renews them. And as I step into that season, I'm carrying every lesson, every bond, every quiet reminder that authenticity is the only thing worth protecting. Because what's really coming isn't a new version of me, it's the real one finally breathing again. Fame is a strange thing. It gives you everything you thought you wanted and then quietly takes away the things you didn't know you'd miss. Privacy, simplicity, the ability to make mistakes without a witness. I used to think fame was a mirror reflecting success, but now I know it's a prism. It bends every truth that passes through it. Even sincerity changes shape when millions of eyes are watching. When the world looks at you long enough, you start to see yourself through its gaze. You begin editing your own emotions before they can be misunderstood. You learn which angles look forgiving, which words sound safe, which silences are less dangerous. You tell yourself it's professionalism, but it's fear wearing a polite mask. I didn't realize how deep that fear had settled until I caught myself hesitating before speaking in interviews, calculating how a single word might echo online. That's when I understood. The moment you start filtering your truth to protect your image, you've already started losing both. There's this pressure that comes with visibility, the expectation that you'll always be composed, grateful, inspiring. But human beings aren't built to perform gratitude 24 hours a day. Sometimes we're tired, sometimes we're confused. Sometimes we don't have answers. Fame doesn't leave much room for that kind of honesty. It rewards control, not vulnerability. And yet, without vulnerability, everything turns hollow. The applause gets louder, but the meaning fades. I remember the first time I realized how far perception had drifted from reality. It was during a live stream. I was smiling, joking, doing everything I was supposed to, but inside I felt empty. The comments were filled with words like happy, glowing, so energetic. I stared at the screen thinking they're describing someone I don't recognize. That's the danger of fame. It can convince the world that you're fine long after you've stopped being okay. At first, I thought the solution was to withdraw completely, to disappear, to hide. But hiding doesn't heal you. It just freezes you in place. So I started asking myself harder questions. Why do I crave approval? When did connection become performance? When did the stage, which used to feel like home, start feeling like surveillance? The answers didn't come easily. They came in small moments, in the quiet after concerts, in the pause before interviews, in the spaces between camera clicks. I realized that I had mistaken visibility for intimacy. I believed that being seen was the same as being understood. But visibility is about the eyes. Understanding is about the heart. And the heart requires risk. That's why rebuilding trust both with myself and with the world has become part of this journey. I want to trust that I can speak honestly without being reduced to a headline. I want to trust that fans will feel the difference between performance and confession. And most of all, I want to trust myself again to know that my worth isn't dependent on applause or validation, but on the quiet integrity of being real even when it costs me something. Rebuilding that trust means facing uncomfortable truths, like how fame can turn love into currency. Every post, every gesture, every word can be monetized, dissected, debated. Somewhere along the line, sincerity becomes strategy and affection becomes algorithm. It's terrifying how quickly that happens. You start second-guessing even your purest emotions because you've learned that everything can be misread. But love isn't meant to be analyzed, it's meant to be felt. I think about the fans who've grown up with me. You've seen my triumphs and my mistakes. You've seen me at my most confident and my most uncertain. And through it all, you stayed. That loyalty is humbling. It makes me want to be better, not bigger. It's what keeps me grounded when everything else feels like noise. Because real connection, the kind that survives distance and misunderstanding, isn't built on perfection. It's built on trust. There were times I failed that trust, not by lying, but by hiding. By pretending I was fine when I wasn't. by letting silence speak when I should have said, I'm struggling. But honesty isn't something you lose forever. It waits for you, quietly, until you're ready to pick it up again. That's what I'm doing now, picking it up, piece by piece. Rebuilding trust also means accepting that not everyone will understand. Some people prefer the version of you that never changes, the one frozen in their favorite era. But life doesn't work like that. People evolve, feelings shift, dreams stretch and bend. If you stay the same just to please others, you'll wake up one day realizing you've become a museum exhibit preserved but lifeless. I'd rather risk being misunderstood than live without growth. There's a moment before every performance when the lights dim and the audience holds its breath. That silence used to terrify me, now it feels sacred. It's the only moment when everything is equal: me, the crowd, the truth. No image, no filter, just anticipation. That's what I want November to be: a long inhale before the next note. A pause that isn't emptiness but preparation. The more I strip away the layers fame built around me, the more I rediscover the simple things that once made me happy. Writing lyrics that no one else will hear. Walking at night without being recognized. Listening to strangers talk about their lives and realizing that fame doesn't make me different, it just makes me visible. The same insecurities, the same fears, the same longing for peace, they exist in everyone. And maybe that's why honesty matters so much. It reminds us we're not alone in our messiness. Relearning honesty also means forgiving myself for the times I chose comfort over truth, because growth isn't linear. Some days I still want to retreat behind the image. Some days I still want to disappear. But I remind myself that courage isn't about never hiding. It's about coming back after you do. Fame taught me how fragile perception is. One rumor can erase years of sincerity. One misunderstanding can rewrite your story. That used to terrify me, but now I see it differently. If perception can change that easily, then maybe so can understanding. Maybe the same audience that misreads you can also relearn you if you give them something real to see. So, what's coming in November isn't about controlling the narrative. It's about releasing it. About saying, here I am, no script, no perfection, no guarantees. Because trust can't be demanded. It can only be earned through consistency. Through showing up imperfect, but honest, again and again. I've been writing a lot about freedom lately. Not the grand kind, but the personal one. The freedom to rest without guilt. The freedom to say no without apology. The freedom to create without expectation. Those freedoms feel small until you lose them. Then they become everything. When I picture the future, I don't see bigger stages or brighter lights. I see moments that feel real, sharing a song that came from pain, holding a note that trembles because it's honest, hearing fans sing not just because it's catchy, but because it's true. That's the kind of legacy I want to build, one that trusts truth more than polish. Rebuilding trust with myself also means letting go of control. I can't dictate how people will interpret my choices. I can only ensure that those choices come from clarity, not fear. That's the hardest part, accepting that honesty doesn't guarantee understanding. It only guarantees freedom. And freedom, I'm learning, is worth every misunderstanding it invites. When November arrives, it won't come with fireworks or press releases. It'll come quietly, like morning light creeping through curtains. You won't have to look for it. You'll feel it. In the calm between noise, in the sincerity behind every word, in the way I carry myself without pretending anymore. That's how I'll rebuild trust with silence that tells the truth. Because the world doesn't need more performances. It needs presence. It needs people willing to live without disguises, even when that vulnerability feels like exposure. That's what I'm choosing now. To live without disguise, To trust again, not in image, but in essence. And maybe when the world sees that, they'll remember that behind every celebrity, every idol, every name on a screen, there's just a person trying to be whole. That's all I've ever wanted, to be whole again. That's what November really means. There's something I've learned about love when it comes from the public. It's both the most powerful and the most fragile thing you can ever experience. It lifts you higher than you thought you could reach. But if you're not careful, it can also hollow you out from the inside. Because public love is different from personal love. It doesn't really know you. It knows the version of you that was captured, edited, shared, and interpreted 1,000 different ways. It's real, but it's also borrowed. It belongs to the idea of you. And the longer you live inside that idea, the harder it becomes to remember who you actually are. For years, I measured my worth by that love, the charts, the cheers, the numbers that never stopped climbing. Each time the world clapped, it felt like proof that I was enough. But the problem with conditional love is that the silence between applause can feel like rejection. You start chasing the sound just to make sure it doesn't stop. And somewhere in that chase, you lose the ability to recognize quiet as peace. It took me a long time to admit how much that affected me, how much I relied on external love to fill internal voids, how much I feared being misunderstood because misunderstanding felt like betrayal. But the truth is, no one owes me perfect understanding. People only see what they're shown. And for too long, I only showed what felt safe. There were days when I felt invincible, when the stage lights made everything look golden. And then there were days when the same lights felt like interrogation lamps, exposing every flaw, every exhaustion line, every human crack that fame tries to hide. It's strange how the same spotlight that celebrates you can also consume you. But that's the price of being visible. You become both inspiration and target. Loved deeply and judged publicly, often in the same breath. At first, I fought against that duality. I wanted to control how people saw me. I wanted to correct every rumor, defend every decision, explain every silence. But the more I tried to manage perception, the more trapped I felt inside it. Because defending yourself all the time is just another kind of performance, and you can't heal while performing. So I stopped. I stopped explaining. I stopped chasing validation. I stopped trying to be understood by everyone. That's when forgiveness started to make sense to me, not as an act toward others, but as a way of freeing myself. Forgiveness isn't about pretending the pain never happened. It's about releasing the power that pain has over you. I had to forgive the world for misunderstanding me. I had to forgive myself for letting it shape me. I had to forgive both love and criticism because they often come from the same place, attention. People talk, project, debate, analyze, not because they hate you, but because they feel connected to you in some way. And while that can be overwhelming, it's also strangely beautiful. It means you've touched something real in them, even if they express it imperfectly. I used to think forgiveness was a weakness, that it meant letting go of accountability, but now I see it as strength, the kind that comes from understanding your own humanity and extending that understanding to others. I realized that holding on to anger doesn't protect you, it poisons you. And the moment you let it go, the air gets lighter. You start breathing differently. There's one moment I keep coming back to. It was after a particularly tough wave of criticism online. I remember scrolling through my phone, reading comments that twisted kindness into motive, passion into ego. My heart hurt not because of what they said, but because part of me believed them. When you hear something often enough, it starts echoing in your own head. I turned off my phone, sat on the floor, and just breathed. And in that silence, I asked myself, would you still do this if no one approved? The answer came quietly but clearly, yes, because it's who I am. That's when I realized the most important thing. Love and criticism are both reflections. They're mirrors showing different sides of how people experience you. You can't control the reflection. You can only control your intention. And if your intention is rooted in truth, then you can stand in front of any mirror, no matter how distorted it becomes. The hardest forgiveness came when I looked inward. I had to face the part of me that was addicted to perfection, the part that equated mistakes with failure and silence with weakness. I had to tell that part, it's okay to be human, because that's something fame doesn't teach you. It punishes you for learning it too slowly. But humanity isn't something to outgrow. It's something to return to. When I think about November now, I see it as that return. The turning point between exhaustion and acceptance. Between performing strength and allowing vulnerability. Between being loved for what I do and being seen for who I am. I know some people will still misunderstand. Some will say this reflection is a rebranding, a reinvention, a strategy. But those who've really listened over the years will know it's just me growing into the version of myself that was always there beneath the noise. Because what's really coming isn't transformation, it's revelation. Forgiveness also extends to the people who've hurt you without meaning to. The industry can be cold, but it's also full of people trying their best to survive its storms. Managers, producers, journalists, they all carry their own fears. Once I started seeing that, it became easier to release bitterness. I stopped expecting purity in a system built on pressure. Instead, I started looking for moments of honesty. The genuine smiles backstage, the late night messages from fans who didn't want anything except to say thank you, the laughter that broke through exhaustion during rehearsal. Those small moments of truth are what keep this life bearable. There's something sacred about healing publicly but quietly. You don't announce it, you just live it. You start showing up differently. You answer questions with more patience. You perform with more peace. You let your music carry what words can't. That's the kind of healing I'm after, the kind that doesn't need to be proven. When I forgive, I'm not forgetting the lessons. I'm carrying them differently, lighter, with perspective instead of pain. Because forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened. It's about reclaiming your power over how it shapes you. To the people who've loved me unconditionally, thank you. To the ones who've criticized me honestly, thank you too. Both forms of truth have shaped me. They've stripped away ego and left me with something pure humility. And humility, I've realized, is the foundation of peace. I'm not the same person I was when all of this began. I don't need the same kind of approval. I don't crave the same kind of noise. Now, I crave stillness that feels earned. Love that feels steady. Work that feels meaningful. That's the direction I'm walking in this November. Not away from the world, but toward balance. Because at the end of the day, fame and freedom don't have to be opposites. They can coexist, but only when truth sits between them. When you stop living to be loved and start loving to live. So, if you ask me what's really coming this November, I'll say this: forgiveness. Not as a grand gesture, but as a quiet revolution. One that begins in the heart and spreads through every choice that follows. A revolution that says, I don't need to be perfect to be worth understanding. That's the kind of peace I'm building. Not loud, not fragile, but honest. The kind that doesn't depend on applause, trends, or headlines. The kind that can't be taken away once you've found it. And maybe that's what we're all searching for, whether we're on stage or behind the screen, to be seen without performing, to be loved without conditions, to forgive without forgetting. That's where healing begins. That's where November begins. There's a quiet kind of teacher that arrives when everything else goes silent. It doesn't shout lessons or offer clear answers. It just sits with you, like time itself slowing down to watch what you'll do next. That's what solitude became for me, a teacher I never asked for but desperately needed. I used to think being alone was something to escape from. Now I see it's the only place where you can truly hear yourself again. In this life, there's always noise. Even when you think you found peace, there's a notification somewhere waiting to break it. For years, I moved from one sound to another: applause, laughter, interviews, music, conversations that filled the space, but not always my soul. Then one day, I stopped moving. And in that stillness, the noise didn't fade. It screamed. All the thoughts I'd buried under busyness came rushing back: the doubts, the exhaustion, the questions I'd been too scared to ask when everything was spinning too fast. At first, the silence was unbearable. Without the routine, without the schedule, I felt lost. I kept reaching for my phone, checking for messages that weren't there. I realized how addicted I'd become to distraction. Silence forces you to face the version of yourself you've ignored. And I had ignored mine for a long time. The first few weeks felt like withdrawal. My mind raced, replaying old conversations, unfinished dreams, the times I spoke when I should have listened and stayed quiet when I should have spoken. But then, slowly, the noise inside began to settle. The chaos turned into rhythm, and that's when the lessons began. Solitude taught me patience. I learned that healing doesn't come when you demand it. It comes when you allow it. I used to want answers right away, as if reflection was a task with a deadline. But peace doesn't follow your schedule. It follows your honesty. And honesty takes time. I started sitting by the window in the early mornings, watching the city wake up. No cameras, no plans, just the quiet rhythm of life continuing without me. It was humbling. It reminded me that the world doesn't need me to move in order to keep spinning, and somehow that truth brought comfort. Solitude also taught me creativity again. Not the kind that's planned or produced, but the spontaneous kind, the kind that comes when you stop trying so hard to be original and just let yourself exist. I started writing lyrics again, not for an album, not for anyone to hear, just because the words wanted to exist. They came like whispers, half-formed sentences that didn't care about structure or rhyme. One of them said, "Even the stars take nights off." I laughed when I wrote it, but it felt true. Even light needs rest. In the quiet, I started to understand faith differently too. Not religion, but faith. The belief that life has meaning, even when you can't see the full picture. When you're constantly surrounded by noise, it's easy to confuse control with purpose. You start believing that if you just plan enough, work enough, shine enough, you can keep the uncertainty away. But solitude strips you of that illusion. It shows you how small you are in the best possible way. And once you accept that, you stop fearing stillness. There were nights when I'd walk alone through the streets of Seoul with a mask on, unnoticed. I'd pass by families, friends laughing, kids playing. And for the first time in years, I wasn't watching life happen through a lens. I was part of it. Just another person breathing in cold air, listening to the sound of his own footsteps. There was something sacred about being invisible again. It reminded me that presence doesn't need witnesses to be real. In those moments, I found creativity returning like an old friend who forgave me for abandoning it. Songs started forming in my head, not about perfection, but about moments, about holding on and letting go, about how the most important things in life often go unseen. I wrote lines about the way moonlight touches empty streets, about the way loneliness isn't always sorrow, it's sometimes just space making room for clarity. People often say solitude is lonely, but I don't think that's true. Loneliness is when you're disconnected from others. Solitude is when you're reconnecting with yourself. They might look similar from the outside, but they feel completely different on the inside. Solitude has peace in it, a quiet assurance that you're exactly where you need to be, even if you don't know where you're going next. That's what November has come to mean for me, trusting the space between what was and what will be. It's not a pause before something big. It's the thing itself, the deep breath, the calm before creation, the rebuilding that happens in the dark before the light returns. In the quiet, I've also learned something about love. That real love doesn't rush you. It doesn't demand constant expression. It waits patiently while you figure yourself out. The love that stays through silence is the love that lasts. And that's true for the fans, the members, my family, and the people who've quietly believed in me even when I didn't have anything new to show them. That's the kind of love that keeps me grounded. Sometimes I sit in the studio now with no goal, just listening to sound the way one note fades into another, the way silence breathes between chords. There's beauty in imperfection when you stop forcing harmony and start letting it happen. Maybe that's how life is supposed to be. Maybe harmony isn't about making everything fit. It's about learning to hear the beauty in things that don't. Solitude has also softened the way I see the world. I used to think peace was something you find. Now I believe it's something you practice, every day in small choices.